Dr. Theo, a surgeon, was on vacation when he met Sheriff Pope. After a night of drinking, Theo mysteriously woke up in Wayward Pines, far from where he last remembered being with his wife. A woman urged him to the hospital, but he was confused. A sudden curfew warning of danger heightened his suspicions, prompting him to jump out of a moving jeep to escape. He sought help at a nearby house, but the homeowner reported him. Fleeing again, Theo found a wall marked with blood and bullet holes. Soldiers took him to the hospital, where he operated on Kate. Meanwhile, Ben, son of the former Sheriff Ethan, had taken over as rebel leader after Ethan died saving the town from mutants 3 years earlier. The next morning, Theo checked on Kate, who warned him not to trust Jason. Their conversation was interrupted by Carrie, who sent Theo to meet his wife. Soon after, Jason arrived, pressuring Kate for Ben's location, but she refused to talk. Frustrated, Jason planned drastic actions. As Theo wandered the streets, he saw soldiers dragging a woman away, but when he asked where they were taking her, they ignored him. Later, a man, one of Kate's followers, helps Theo escape and explains Kate's situation. They noticed a crowd gathering for Jason's speech, where Jason labeled Kate's group as rebels and executed 3 of Ben's men, including the woman from earlier. Furious, Theo tried to intervene, but was stopped. Just as Jason was about to execute the second captive, Ben revealed himself, and Jason ordered his capture, ending the rebellion. Theo reunited with his wife, Rebecca, but realized they were trapped. Before they could escape, soldiers took him to Jason. Jason, irritated by Theo's defiance, saw him as a threat and forced him into a car with others. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Megan told Kate that Ben was captured. Kate fought back, but realizing her situation was hopeless, ended her life. The car carrying Theo and Ben reached the isolation wall. Theo was knocked unconscious, and the car sped through the gate, crashing. As Theo awoke, he heard screams and saw Abby's approaching. In the control room, Jason watched as mutants tried to scale the wall. Troops were sent, but the mutants missed Theo and Ben, who escaped into the woods. By the time Jason arrived, some mutants had breached the wall and severely injured Carrie. Soldiers fought back until the mutants retreated. Jason rushed Carrie to the hospital, but the doctor couldn't save her, and Jason remembered Theo was outside the wall. Desperate, Jason sent soldiers to retrieve Theo. Surrounded by mutants, Theo jumped onto the military vehicle. Back at the hospital, Jason demanded Theo operate on Carrie. Theo refused until he saw his wife, Rebecca. Under pressure, Jason revealed humanity's collapse. Though skeptical, Theo agreed to the surgery after Rebecca convinced him, successfully saving Carrie. Later, Theo and Rebecca returned to a house where she revealed she had lived for 3 years, slowly learning the truth. She believed Jason's story might be true, and survival in Wayward Pines was becoming uncertain. While talking with CJ Mitchum, it was revealed that crops couldn't grow within the town due to soil changes, forcing them to farm outside the quarantine wall, where mutant attacks were a constant threat. Mario, the commanding officer, observed during the last battle that mutants feared fire and suggested using it as a defense. At the hospital, Theo was greeted by Arlene while Megan was teaching students using Abby's body. Theo began working, but Jason appeared and they argued about the town's harsh rules. Frustrated, Theo walked away. On his way home, Theo overheard 2 kids mentioning Rebecca's job, realizing she was no longer an architect. When he asked her about it, she simply stated she was doing what was assigned to her. Meanwhile, soldiers executed Mario's plan, using flamethrowers to protect the crops from mutants. Suddenly, Ben, who had been exiled, emerged from the fields. Despite being from the same generation, the soldiers ignored him and closed the gate once the harvest was finished, leaving Ben behind. Refusing to give up, Ben invoked the town's rule against harming the first generation, but Jason, holding a grudge, ordered surveillance on Ben to be cut off. With food supplies restored, the crisis eased. Meanwhile, Ben's mother, Teresa, desperately searched for him. When soldiers refused to help, she accused them of killing him, leading to her imprisonment. In the cornfield, Ben was hiding when mutants attacked him. Back in town, Jason received footage showing that the mutants beyond the wall had mysteriously vanished. 2 soldiers ventured into the woods to investigate a strange noise, only to discover it was just a deer. At the hospital, Arlene mentioned to Theo that the Abbeys had disappeared, and casually suggested grabbing a drink, but he declined, reminding her he was married. Jason, meanwhile, discussed the mysterious absence of the Abbeys, noting that the heat-sensing equipment covering a 35-mile range had picked up nothing. He speculated whether the earlier use of a flamethrower might have scared them off. Carrie coldly reminded Jason that this was the perfect chance to rescue Ben, warning that if Ben died, Jason would break the town's rule against harming the first generation. Later that night, as Jason and Carrie were being intimate, a disturbance echoed from downstairs. Gun in hand, Jason went to check and was startled to see Pam, the nurse and sister of the town's founder, Dr. Jenkins. Since Jason had killed Dr. Jenkins, Pam had been kept under strict confinement. Despite this, she now appeared pleased, recognizing that Jason was following the plans she had helped her brother create. She offered to help Jason implement these strategies even better, and he publicly welcomed her return in front of the town. Pam slipped into the medical room, searching for something. Theo saw her but was dismissed, when she pocketed a syringe. Jason's decision to bring her back wasn't just about her skills, it was personal. As the first child born in Wayward Pines, Jason had been shaped by Pam into the leader he became. Pam then headed to the lab where soldiers hesitated, but let her in due to her connection with Jason. She pocketed a vial of virus samples. As she left, Megan, bitter over Dr. Jenkins' death, confronted her and forced her out. At home, Pam prepared to inject herself with the virus. Theo arrived, asking for her help at the hospital, noticed the syringe but said nothing. After he left, Pam injected the virus into herself. Jason and his men discussed expanding the town's borders now that the mutants were gone. Pam arrived, greeting Jason warmly. Suddenly, Theo rushed in, warning of a virus test. Megan followed, accusing Pam of stealing a vial of smallpox. Megan informed Theo, who recalled the syringe at Pam's house, and realized her plan. Pam admitted her disappointment in Jason's harsh leadership, believing she had failed to guide him. She intended to use the virus to end his regime and restore the town's original purpose. The virus was caught in time and no one was infected. Jason left with no choice, ended Pam's life, and refocused on the town's future with a renewed sense of responsibility. Xander, trapped in a cave, was attacked by a mutant. He fought it off, strangling it to death, but was completely exhausted by the time he escaped. In town, CJ led a meeting. The crops he pushed for beyond the isolation wall had proven essential, and he urged the need for more fertile land. Jason agreed, also noting that 12 scouts sent out by Dr. Jenkins were expected to return soon. Meanwhile, Xander found a water source, unaware that Adam, a scout sent years ago to explore and find survivors, was quietly approaching him from behind. Back in town, Rebecca noticed Lucy had gotten her first period and offered her comfort. Later that night, Adam and Xander sat by a fire, exchanging stories. After some conversation, they made the decision to head back to Wayward Pines. As they neared the town, alarms blared in the surveillance room. Monitors showed figures approaching the isolation wall. Guards rushed out expecting danger, but recognized two familiar humans and let them pass. Adam, weakened and scarred from years outside, was examined by Theo. He hinted that the mutants were not enemies, but replacements for humanity. Ignoring medical advice, Adam left the hospital, wandering the streets with purpose. He eventually encountered Teresa, revealing he had been her husband Ethan's boss, the one who sent Ethan to Wayward Pines. Teresa blamed him for her family's pain, while Adam remained silent, guilt-ridden. Later, CJ led a group of soldiers to explore the farmlands. Teresa stopped him, pleading to join in her search for Ben, and CJ agreed. Adam quietly joined as well. Meanwhile, Rebecca confronted Megan about pressuring Lucy to have children, with Megan insisting it was everyone's duty for the town's survival. That night, CJ's group set up camp, and Teresa confided in Adam about Ben's location. As darkness fell, Adam slipped away, armed. Later, Teresa was awakened by a noise. Stepping outside, she saw Adam returning with a body bag and immediately knew it was her son, Ben. In another part of the town, Rebecca informed Theo about Lucy's situation. Hearing that Megan was pressuring her, Theo became furious, given how young Lucy was. Back in the streets of Wayward Pines, a young student, Frank stood near a round, staring blankly. Suddenly, the ride stopped. As Frank looked around in confusion, he noticed something chilling, a mutant watching him intently. 2,000 years ago, Rebecca walked into her office to find Dr. Jenkins waiting. He asked her to work on a project and discuss it over dinner. His request was to design a town for both living and recreation. In the present, a mutant appeared but didn't attack, puzzling the guards. Jason was ready to kill it, but the assistant recognized it as a female. They captured her without resistance and brought her to the lab. This silenced the other mutants, as they had only encountered males before. The branding on her hand sparked curiosity. It was unlike anything they had seen. Megan, in charge of the lab, decided to study her closely, hoping for a breakthrough to end the mutant threat. Mario informed Jason that the town had been searched thoroughly, with no other mutants found, and the isolation wall was intact. No one could figure out how the mutant had entered. Teresa buried Ben, and though TJ tried to comfort her, she insisted she wasn't returning to town, despite his warnings about safety. Jason asked Rebecca if the town had any design flaws. She confidently replied that if there were, they would have had problems long ago. Meanwhile, Frank awkwardly prepared to sleep with a girl to fulfill his duty, but his lack of interest led to an argument, and she stormed off in frustration. Carrie met with Theo to discuss collaborating on mutant research. Theo later informed Megan they'd begin the study the next day. In the past, Rebecca eagerly asked Dr. Jenkins when they'd start building the town, only to be disappointed when he said it would take time. Megan mentioned it might be 2,000 years, leaving Rebecca baffled. In the present, Frank confided in Theo about his failed attempt with the girl. Theo suggested Frank might be gay, causing him to panic and ask for a cure to fulfill his duties. Later, Rebecca revealed to Theo that due to the town's procreation policies, she and Xander had been married during their second year of awakening, while Theo was still in cryosleep. Furious and heartbroken by the revelation, Theo threw his wedding ring to the ground, punched Xander in a rage, and stormed out of the house. Meanwhile, Teresa, grieving the loss of her son Ben, couldn't stop crying after his burial. Adam's attempts to comfort her were in vain. That night, Theo returned home to find Rebecca asleep. Without saying a word, he quietly left. Suddenly, a group of mutants carrying torches invaded. In a coordinated attack, they threw the torches into the fields, setting them ablaze. Afterward, they stood back, waiting for further orders as the flames spread. In the forest, a group of Abbeys went about their lives when a helicopter appeared, firing upon them. Dr. Jenkins stepped out once the shooting stopped. In truth, it was Jenkins and the townspeople who were the real intruders, which likely explained why the mutants constantly fought back. Theo sat in a bar, drinking to drown his anger. Rebecca arrived to explain, and Theo asked if she had tried to have a baby with Xander. Before she could answer, alarms blared. The mutants were approaching. The scouts, including CJ, were the first to face the danger. Adam sensed something was wrong, and seeing flames in the farmland, raised the alarm, but it was too late. Mutants invaded, causing chaos. Teresa was knocked down, and though Adam tried to help, he was gravely injured. News of the attack spread quickly, soldiers rushed to their posts, and all the men in town were summoned. Dr. Theo was taken to the hospital by Carrie as the medical staff prepared for battle. Jason and his team fought fiercely against the mutants, but the fire spread uncontrollably, leaving the farmland in ruins. Jason collapsed in despair, realizing all was lost. The hospital was overwhelmed as injured people poured in. The inexperienced staff had to manage, while CJ and Adam returned with minor injuries. Teresa, though stabilized by Theo, remained in a coma. Shaken by the mutants' return, Jason was reassured by Carrie to stay strong. In a meeting, Mario reported 35 soldiers dead, and resources were running low. CJ warned that the mutants had learned to use fire, but Jason refused to believe they were that intelligent. Adding to the pressure, CJ revealed crops would take months to grow, and food supplies were dwindling. Still, Jason held a memorial for the fallen, encouraging the town to rebuild. Theo delivered more bad news, medicine supplies were nearly gone, and the town couldn't make more. Before Jason could react, Mario reported a large group of mutants outside the wall. CJ suspected the earlier retreat was a trap, but Jason still viewed the mutants as wild animals. Adam, consumed with guilt, visited Teresa in her hospital room. Years ago, he had conspired to bring her husband Ethan to Wayward Pines, hoping Teresa would turn to him, but her determination to find Ethan led her and their son to the town, causing their suffering. Teresa suddenly opened her eyes, filled with disgust. She pulled away from Adam and, in her final moments, remembered the happiness she once had with her family before passing away. In the lab, Theo found Megan scanning a captured female mutant. Unlike the others, this one remained calm. The scan revealed the mutant's language center was twice the size of a human's, suggesting superior intelligence. Theo rushed to find Adam, the only person to survive close contact with the mutants. When Theo mentioned the brain scan, Adam immediately asked if the mutant had a brand on its hand, confirming his suspicions. As the town braced for the unknown, the sound of gathering mutants outside the walls grew ever closer. Theo rushed back to the lab, confirming the mark on the female mutant's hand. He became certain the Abbeys were an intelligent species, and the female might have infiltrated the town with a plan. He attempted to communicate, but Megan expressed frustration at the lack of success. Suddenly, Adam burst in, demanding the mutant's release. Theo intervened as Adam explained that he had witnessed the Abbeys spend months etching that symbol, signifying the female as their leader. The mutants outside the town were likely there for her. In the past, CJ and Dr. Jenkins debated whether the Abbeys were mere animals or posed a real threat. Jenkins, determined to protect the settlement, insisted on building a fence. Back in the lab, Adam told the group that Wayward Pines belonged to the Abbeys and that they would continue their attacks. As they spoke, a series of roars echoed through the town. Theo suggested a bold plan: teach the mutant leader to communicate to negotiate peace. Using cards with symbols, he taught her their meanings, and within hours, she learned them all. Theo proposed negotiation, but Jason rejected the idea, believing it was a trick. Theo demonstrated the leader's intelligence with the cards, but Jason remained unconvinced, considering it a mere animal response. Frustrated, Theo used a card symbolizing friendship and opened the neighboring cage, risking his life. The mutant leader stopped her followers from attacking, proving her understanding. Jason, however, shot several mutants, enraged by the situation. Even Carrie urged Jason to reconsider, but feeling humiliated, Jason stormed out. Megan, still loyal to the town's original vision, refused to see the Abbeys as anything more than a lower race. Exhausted, Theo left the lab, realizing there was little more he could do. Jason, seeking answers, asked CJ about the origins of the mutants. CJ explained that while everyone slept in dormancy, he awoke every 20 years to maintain the base and monitor the world. Over centuries, as nations fell to war, disease, and disasters, he observed animals beginning to mutate. Occasionally, CJ encountered surviving humans, and fearing for the base's safety, had to eliminate them. Later, while working in the lab, Megan noticed her legs bleeding. Turning around, she saw the mutant leader had escaped and attacked her. Megan collapsed and died as the mutant leader calmly walked away. When Theo discovered the mutant's escape, he immediately sounded the alarm. Jason, furious, mobilized soldiers to search the lab, but the mutant had already fled into the forest, likely heading for the town's wall. Unable to find the mutant leader, Theo urged Jason to involve the townspeople, fearing the outside mutants wouldn't attack while their leader was missing. Jason agreed, and alarms sent residents indoors, while some younger townsfolk were recruited for the guard squad. Xander asked Rebecca when she planned to tell Theo that she was pregnant with his child. Unbeknownst to the town, the mutant had already entered, killed a rookie guard, and returned to town. When spotted, the guards opened fire, but it vanished before they could hit it. Xander handed out his private weapons to assist in the search, while Rebecca used her knowledge of the town's layout to guide efforts. She suspected the mutant would escape through the sewer and needed the original blueprints from Jason's office. As she left, Xander reminded her to be cautious. Meanwhile, Adam and Theo found bloodstains in the pine forest, tracking the mutant's path. While searching Jason's office, Rebecca was confronted by Carrie, who questioned her actions. Rebecca urged Carrie to stop blindly following Jason and think for herself. Elsewhere, chaos led to soldiers and civilians accidentally shooting each other, injuring Mario and a civilian. Following the blood trail, Adam and Theo found a soldier's corpse, realizing it was a trick. Theo believed the mutants were heading south to escape, but Adam suspected it was a diversion and headed east. In town, Theo diffused a tense standoff between soldiers and a grieving woman whose husband was killed in the crossfire. Jason revealed his secret escape plan to Carrie, a fortified room to continue humanity if the town fell. Carrie, however, was troubled, knowing she was infertile due to a previous mutant attack. Rebecca, holding the blueprints, encountered Abby. Before it attacked, it hesitated upon noticing her pregnancy. Xander arrived firing at the mutant, causing it to flee. Rebecca reached Jason and Carrie, explaining the tunnel's path. Meanwhile, Adam saw Abby, lowered his weapon, and followed it into the sewer. Jason's group reached the tunnel and sealed the sewer with grenades as mutant roars echoed outside the wall. Adam emerged from the sewer surrounded by mutants. Surprisingly, they spared him, but their leader was weakened by her gunshot wound. Adam feared her possible death could lead to retaliation and chaos in the town. From the surveillance feed, Carrie noticed the injured mutant leader and wondered if its death would stop the attacks. Jason dismissed this, saying the mutants would just choose a new leader and dig a new tunnel if one was destroyed. He ordered Carrie to summon CJ and Dr. Theo. Theo, meanwhile, approached Xander, refusing to follow Jason's plan. Xander, focused on preventing a mutant attack, didn't agree. CJ then arrived and invited Theo to meet Jason, who proposed re-entering hibernation. Jason later addressed the town explaining the plan, but the crowd was uneasy. CJ reassured them, but upon inspecting the pods, he found the energy supply could only support 571, far fewer. Meanwhile, a group of female mutants tended to their injured leader, cauterizing her wound and using plants and healing liquid to aid her recovery. Jason asked Dr. Theo to compile health scores to prioritize who would enter the pods, a survival selection process. Theo protested, suggesting a random draw for fairness, but Jason insisted those with special skills and the first generation should be prioritized. Their argument escalated when Theo accused Jason of planning to abandon Carrie due to her infertility. Before Jason could respond, Carrie entered, ending the conversation. After Jason left, Theo told Carrie about the hibernation plan, hinting Jason might leave her behind and that his loyalty was really to Dr. Jenkins. In the past, Dr. Jenkins found baby Jason in a hospital, impressed by Carrie's intelligence. He brought them to Wayward Pines, altering records to hide Carrie's identity. Later, Jason discovered a secret document revealing Jenkins had originally chosen another child as leader, but selected Jason after the first baby died. Carrie, shaken by Theo's revelations, entered the room, questioning if Jason intended to abandon her. Consumed by the file's contents, Jason angrily accused her of hiding the truth. They argued, and in the struggle, Jason accidentally discharged his gun, injuring himself as Carrie stood in shock. Outside the hospital, anxious residents gathered at the hibernation base, desperate for spots in the pods. That night, the injured mutant leader awoke, regaining its strength. From a high vantage point, it looked down at the gathered mutants, poised to attack Wayward Pines. The mutant leader called for reinforcements, spreading out to neighboring tribes to rally more for the impending attack. Inside the town, soldiers escorted selected residents to the cryopods. Those not chosen were reassured with false promises of a next wave, unaware of their fate, while the chosen began entering the pods. After a failed surgery, Theo announced Jason's death. An intern accused him of intentional error in killing Jason. CJ discussed the pods with Theo, who expressed concerns about leaving others behind. Theo later told Carrie that Jason's death had freed up a pod for her. At the local school, most students were evacuated, but some resisted the town's forced pairing. Frank rushed to comfort Lucy but was knocked down by a soldier. Meanwhile, soldiers arrived at Rebecca's door, ready to escort her to her hibernation pod at the base. As Rebecca prepared to enter the hibernation pod, soldiers stopped Xander, telling him he'd have to wait for the next round. Despite her protest, Xander, prepared for this, gently persuaded her to go ahead without him. With the town's evacuation almost complete, CJ urged Theo to enter a pod, as doctors were essential. Disillusioned, Theo rejected extending his life in the pod, believing everyone should choose their own path, and decided to contribute in his own way. Theo began recording a message outlining his plan. The lab stored deadly bacterial strains from history, and he intended to inject himself with the Black Death, typhoid, and the Marburg virus. His goal was to let the mutants eat him during the incubation period, thereby spreading the diseases and wiping out the mutant population. This would allow the dormant residents to wake up and start over. As the town descended into chaos, the remaining inhabitants, realizing they had been abandoned, began rioting. Among them was Xander, along with others deemed too weak, rebellious, or violent. People assaulted the base fences, and after a soldier was killed by the angry crowd, CJ was forced to fire a warning shot. While Frank and Xander were drinking, a truck driven by Theo arrived. He urged them to get in quickly. As they prepared to leave, two men blocked their path. Without hesitation, Xander jumped out and opened fire to clear the way. Theo drove them to the base, insisting they enter the hibernation pods. 2 pods were available, including one meant for Theo. Despite their past conflicts, Theo helped Rebecca and Xander stay together, ensuring they shared a pod. When Theo returned to the lab to execute his plan, he found the bacterial strains missing. Carrie had injected them into herself. As the last group prepared to enter the pods, Theo gave a final speech, reflecting on humanity's darkness and resilience, hoping civilization could reignite. After he and the others entered the pods, CJ began the final shutdown, leaving the remaining residents to a grim fate. CJ entered hibernation as an army of mutants waited outside the wall. At this time, Carrie, who had injected the mixed bacterial strains, had reached outside the quarantine wall. Shortly afterward, terrifying roars echoed. Many years later, in a lush forest, a few mutants were searching for food. One of them was holding a baby. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.